Well, hello, church family. I just wanted to make a video for all of you who can't come for whatever reason, and just let you know that I'm thinking about you and praying for the whole church as we just try to go through this really difficult and weird season. Things are just weird. There's no other explanation for it. And so hopefully this video will be out there on Saturday and Sunday, and you won't have to wait until after the service to watch it if you know you're going to stay home and do worship at home. So we've been walking through the book of Exodus in a series called Lessons from the Wilderness. And the reason that we're looking at this is because the people of Israel were between the promise and the fulfillment of the promise. That's the space that they were in the book of Exodus, and we too are in the wilderness in a sense. We also are in that space between the promise and the fulfillment of the promise. And so we've been journeying with the people of Israel out of Egypt and into the wilderness. And just imagine if you're in the wilderness with hundreds of thousands of people, you can imagine that there's probably going to be some challenges. The first challenge that you're definitely going to run into is there's going to be a lack of resources. Okay, you're not going to have enough of what you need. If you've ever been in the wilderness before, you have a hard enough time just providing for yourself, let alone hundreds of thousands of people. And so God provides for the Israelites. He gives them water. He gives them food when they need it. Another thing that you're going to find as a challenge is that people are going to try to take advantage of your difficult situation that you're in. And so the Amalekites, maybe they think they can sweep in and get some easy loot from the people of Israel. And so they attack the Israelites, and of course Moses stands up on a high place and raises his arms, and his servant Joshua goes out and fights the battle. And as long as Moses has his arms up and holds the staff of God up, the people win. Joshua wins. But when he drops his arms, they lose. And so Aaron and Hur come up and hold Moses' arms up, and they win the day. Another thing that you're definitely going to run into is you're going to run into complaining. So when I was a youth minister, I spent a lot of time traveling, going to camps, going to fun places, going to mission trips, you name it, we went to it. And there were some of those trips were really fun. The worst trips were when kids started to complain. And when kids started to complain, it just kind of spread like wildfire throughout the entire youth group. It was pretty soon, everybody was just unhappy with everything. And you can imagine, if you're out in the wilderness with 600,000 plus people, which is what Exodus tells us came up out of Egypt, 600,000 men plus women and children. And so you're looking at a lot of people up there, or out there in the wilderness. And you can imagine if there's just one person that's a little bit grumbly, a little bit complaining, and he has a few people, or she has a few people, and pretty soon everybody's listening, and everybody's getting frustrated, and everybody's starting to complain, and this happens out in the wilderness. And so you can see that all these challenges out in the wilderness, they're going to require some good leadership. And apparently, Moses has a lot to learn about good leadership. So let's pick up where we left off last week. Remember, we left off last week where Moses' father-in-law came for a visit, and he wanted to hear the stories about how the Israelites had gotten pulled out of Egypt, and Jethro, who's Moses' father-in-law, was just incredibly impressed, and he said, "There is no God like your God." And he was amazed, and so he brought sacrifices, he began to worship, and they had a huge fellowship meal that night. Well, then Moses goes to sleep, and the next day he gets up and he goes about his normal routine, which we find is not a good thing. So let's keep reading Exodus chapter 18, starting in verse 13. The next day Moses took his seat to hear the people's disputes against each other. They waited before him from morning till evening. So I read a book several years ago a book called Mad Church Disease. And the idea of the book is that burnout is one of the greatest diseases that churches face. Burnout is a really difficult, disease in churches. And if you've been part of a church for any amount of time, you realize that burnout is a very real thing. Because it seems like in a lot of churches, when you sign up to do something, you're signed up for life, right? Until you quit, until you're done and you're burned out, right? And this happens to a lot of ministers. But I don't think this is just has to do with churches or ministers. This is actually a bigger problem. This actually has to do with any leadership position. All leadership positions are places where burnout can happen. Because there's always people who need you. There's always somebody who needs your time, who needs your ear, who needs something, whatever. And most leaders find themselves in a position where they can just keep working 12 hours a day or 18 hours a day, every day. And so Moses finds himself in this place where he is sitting in the place of judgment, wherever that is, and people are waiting to see him from morning until night, from the time the sun comes up until the sun goes down. And if you are needed to accomplish everything, bad things can happen, right? Well, of course, burnout, we've already mentioned that. But then another thing that can happen is your ego can grow and become the size of an elephant. I mean, you can begin to think way too highly of yourself if everybody needs you for everything. Another thing that can happen when you are needed for everything is that leaders are not developed. And so you are doing all the leading, you're doing all the decision making, you're doing all the stuff, and everybody around you is just waiting for you. They're just waiting for you, and nobody else is being groomed or getting ready to take on leadership. Well, what if you die? Or what if you get removed from the business or the church or wherever it is that you're leading? And immediately you can see the problem there is that a bunch of people will be running around not knowing what to do. And this is exactly what Moses is doing, right? He's acting this way. Luckily, someone spots the danger. Let's keep reading verse 14. We'll read through verse 18. When Moses' father-in-law saw all that Moses was doing for the people, he asked, "What are you really accomplishing here? Why are you trying to do all this alone while everyone stands around you from morning until evening?" Moses replied, "Because the people come to me and get a ruling from God." You see, he's already getting a little bit of a big head. Like, well, I'm the only one who can give a ruling of God. When a dispute arises, verse 16, they come to me, and I am the one who settles the case between the quarreling parties. I inform the people of God's decrees and give them his instructions. Verse 17, "This is not good," Moses' father-in-law exclaimed. "You're going to wear yourself out and the people too. This job is too heavy a burden for you to handle all by yourself." And so here we have Jethro, who is a leader, of course, and a priest. He has been dealing with religious expression for a long time. He has experience leading people, and he sees immediately that something is not right. And I just want to make a little bit of an observation here that I think is really important. And that is this: God doesn't fix every problem for Moses and the people of Israel. He solves the big one, right? The fact that they're in Egyptian slavery. But there are still more problems along the way that they are going to face. And God doesn't give them a fix to every problem. You see, those who experience God's salvation, they are not given an answer to every issue and problem that is faced by the community. You see, the Israelites are now free, but freedom brings these interesting opportunities that they haven't had before. It brings responsibilities and challenges. I mean, think about it. What would be one of the greatest challenges that a people who had been enslaved would face? Well, of course, it's justice, right? Because they haven't had a choice. They have had justice handed to them by their masters for lifetimes. And so one of the greatest things that they're going to struggle with is justice. And so Moses is, of course, trying to help with this. but they're so used to their lives being controlled, but now they have this freedom, and Moses is basically doing all that he can to try to deal with this newfound freedom. And so Jethro notices a problem, and the problem is this, that Moses is an isolated leader. Moses is an isolated leader, and the reason that this is a problem is because isolated leaders wear everybody out. You hear that? Isolated leaders wear everybody out, including themselves. You see, you will only get worn out by your huge burden if you are an isolated leader. The ones you lead will get worn out because they have to wait all day just to spend time with you, just to hear you, just to see you. And there's not going to be anybody else that they can go see who can address their problem. And so Jethro sees the problem, and then he offers a solution, verses 19 and 20. Now listen to me, and let me give you a word of advice, and may God be with you. You should continue to be the people's representative before God, bringing their disputes to him. Teach them God's decrees, and give them his instructions. Show them how to conduct their lives. In other words, Jethro here is reminding Moses that, hey, Moses, you've got a job to do. You've got to be teaching. You've got to be instructing. And yeah, there is a sense in which you are to be their, kind of the in-between between them and God. But more than anything, you have a responsibility to teach and to pass on what God has given you. And let me tell you something. I mean, now there is one sense where judging can be teaching. Judging disputes can be teaching. But my guess is that he's not teaching in the capacity that he needs to, because he is sitting there handling disputes all day long. Okay, those of you who are parents, can you think of a moment or a day maybe when your kids weren't getting along, and so you just had to keep playing peacemaker? You had to keep, figuring out, well, what did he do and what did she do? And you try to get all the information and you try to hand out your judgment. Have you ever done that? Can you imagine doing that from morning until dusk every single day? That is going to wear you out. And there's no way that Moses is being who God has called him to be in the community when he's dealing with that all day long. And so here's Jethro's plan of action to make sure that Moses is making the most of his time and being who he is called to be in the lives of the community. So let's keep reading, verse 21. But select from all the people some capable, honest men who fear God and hate bribes. Appoint them as leaders over groups of 1,000, 100, 50, and 10. They should always be available to solve the people's common disputes, but have them bring the major cases to you. Let the leaders decide the smaller matters themselves. They will help you carry the load, making the task easier for you. If you follow this advice, and if God commands you to do so, then you will be able to endure the pressures, and all these people will go home in peace. So Jethro is trying to ensure that Moses has some longevity as the leader of his people. And here's the thing, if you're going to have some longevity, you've got to share the load. It means more people need to be part of the leadership process. And guess what? When more people are part of the leadership process, more needs get met. And the pressure is not so overwhelming, just like Jethro says. So what did Moses do? He could respond in a lot of different ways. He could say, well, God made me the leader, and so therefore I'm not going to listen to you, Jethro. I'm just going to do what I want. Or he could listen. So let's see what Moses does. Verse 24. Moses listened to his father-in-law's advice and followed his suggestions. He chose capable men from all over Israel, appointed them as leaders over the people. He put them in charge of groups of 1,000, 150, and 10. These men were always available to solve the people's common disputes. They brought the major cases to Moses, but they took care of the smaller matters themselves. So Moses listens to Jethro, and he solves this problem of sitting there and giving out judgments from sun up to sundown. So I want to give you just 3 takeaways that you can walk away with, hopefully, and maybe we can begin to apply this to our lives. And first of all, I want us to remember that sometimes there is a need for human ingenuity. There's a need for human ingenuity. Okay, so sometimes, especially when we're talking about church stuff, God's given us a mission. He's given us a direction. He calls for us to do certain things. He wants us to make disciples of all nations, teaching them to follow Jesus and obey his commandments. That's the Great Commission. We're called to do that. But sometimes, if we're going to accomplish what God has called us to do in our context, we've got to come up with some ideas and plans and how we're going to do it. Sometimes there's a need for human ingenuity. The second thing we need to remember is that leaders must develop the habit of teaching, showing, and releasing, right? Leaders have got to develop the habit of teaching, showing, and releasing. Followers must also get used to seeing this, okay? Because this can sometimes be frustrating to followers. We have this great leader, and he invites us to be part of a small group, or invites us to be part of something that he's doing, and it's wonderful and it's great. And then all of a sudden he says, "All right, now it's your turn." Sometimes people can get frustrated by that, and they can think, "Well, I'm not getting what I need anymore by my leader." Well, listen, he's just following the natural, or she's just following the natural process, right? And the natural process is to teach, to show, and to release. I mean, don't demand that your leader always remain in the same capacity to you, because that's a really selfish thing, right? You must also learn to lead. And the third thing we need to walk away with is that leaders must be people of faith. And the reason that I say this, and this is so important, is because we as leaders have to have faith that God is going to use the people that he's put around us, right? A lot of times we have all these reasons why people can't serve and people can't do and people can't act because of this in their past, or because of that attitude, or because of this or that, whatever it is. We come up with all these reasons why the people around us can't do what we think they should be doing, so therefore we don't ask them. We don't ask them. We just think they can't do it, so we just do it ourselves. But guess what? We've got to have faith in God and the people around us, that he has put the right people around us to accomplish the things that he has called us to accomplish. So if we're standing in the way of that, we're standing in the way of God, and we are not being people of faith. We are not believing and having faith that God can do as he has promised he can do. And so as a church, we don't have a justice problem, I don't think. I don't think we have a bunch of disputes that are happening, but we do have the same possibility for leadership burnout, for egos to get inflated, and for leaders to not be developed. And so as a leader, I am challenged by this message, by this little short passage, Exodus 18:13 through 26. I am challenged to teach, to show, and to release. That's what I'm challenged to do. And as members of the church, I hope that you are challenged to think about, how can I begin to lead? How can I begin to act? How can I begin to contribute to this church in a way that is going to make her successful? Because if all we are is a bunch of people wandering around out in the desert and trying to get everything we need from our leaders, that's where we're going to stay. And we're going to burn our leaders out. We're going to burn ourselves out. We're going to find ourselves in a mess. And so I hope that we as a church can be challenged by this incredible passage to teach, show, and release if you're a leader, and to be willing to be taught, to be shown, and to be released if you are not a leader at this time. But my hope is that we will all one day be leaders in some capacity. So everybody be blessed. Have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful evening, wonderful morning whenever you're watching this. I hope to see you soon if you can't come to church. And my hope and prayer is that we can all be together again, and that God will just begin to move powerfully through all this difficult time. Everybody have a wonderful day.